It's Dendrobium season! Nothing quite like it. Sure, Cattleya season is special because you get those huge, big, voluptuous blooms with that scattered, sensual scents coming from all over the show. Paphiopedilum season is flashy with all those Ferraris here, Lamborghini there. And Nodsidium season is mesmerizing with all those long flower spikes dancing in the wind. But Dendrobium season is abundance, filled with the joy of color and exotic scents to boggle the mind. So let's have a look into how to keep your dendrobiums looking in their best shape so you can enjoy their blooms and the plant looking magnificent. Because if you can't get it to grow, you're not going to need to maintain. Welcome to the Nature Company. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already, and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Let's have a look at these dendrobiums with their glorious blooms that just remind you of hidden jewel temples hidden in the forests, and those amazing scents that nod to exotic spices and wild tropical fruits. But how do we keep our plant in a good enough condition that is going to show itself off at its best to you and to all those who come visit? Because let's face it, that's half of what this is about. We want to boast, but let's take a look at some of the little care regimes that you have to go through just to tidy up your plants so that they can look their best. So with a lot of dendrobiums, especially the noble types and the noble hybrids, they can look particularly messy. They just tend to get a lot of these little kikis all over them, and they can become quite a mess because, especially with these softer cane dendrobiums, their leaves only last for about a year or 2 years. The hard cane dendrobiums, you're going to get a much longer lasting leaf on them. It's going to last several years. So they're not going to look as messy and as tatty and leafless as what some of the soft cane dendrobiums are going to be. And in that regard, with the soft cane dendrobiums, you don't want to remove those leafless canes, because often that's where you're going to get the flowers from. With a lot of these soft cane dendrobiums, often they'll only flower off canes on the second year. So the cane may have lost all its leaves already, and only then will the flowers emerge. Although you can get them to flower on the same year's canes, but they'll be interspaced between the leaves then. But more often than not, you'll find them on those older canes where they can really show themselves off to those pollinators properly. So if you're going to be removing old canes, we've got to get in and look carefully as to which ones to remove. Indeed, the same goes for these hard cane dendrobiums, but they will flower off both the new canes and the old canes at the same time. So always best not to remove off those old canes. And with a lot of these hard cane dendrobiums, they don't like to be disturbed too much. So you don't want to go be removing these old canes, which are, for one, have a lot of energy, stored energy in them for the plant itself. Also, you may notice with hard cane dendrobiums like your Kingianums, they tend to sprout kikis just as frequently as what the soft cane dendrobiums do. And you'll even notice that while attached, they'll still flower off the new kiki as they will flower off the old cane itself too. There's no roots on this yet, so we're not going to be removing this. We'll wait for some good root to form before we actually remove those kikis. Also, we're definitely not going to be removing now while there's some flowers happening, because there will be transplant shock and those flowers will be aborted anyway. So if we are wanting to do any transplanting or removing of kikis during flowering, you're going to have to cut those flowers off. And here, looking at your Dendrobium farmeri, another very difficult plant to play around with. They don't tend to like their roots or pseudobulbs disturbed too much at all. So if you are having problems with the back bulbs dying, what you're going to have to do is go in carefully and just cut those back bulbs off, leaving a short stump at the base. We don't want to mess with this plant too much, as it does cause problems to it. Yeah, we had a nice big flower spike coming, but I'm afraid to say the monkeys got to it and broke it off, and so all we had was a little stump left. But here again, we have a little flower spike coming, so we're going to get another flower off this one. So there's some relief still there. But let's get back to what we're talking about. We're talking about how are we going to clean these plants up to make them look their best. For one, take out any old leaves and things that have fallen in between. That's always the best start. And with these Dendrobium noble types, you'll often find small yellowing, browning leaves, and those generally knock off relatively easily. And all you need to do is take those all off just to give your plant a neater appearance. With the hard cane Dendrobiums type, where their leaves last a lot longer on the plant, you may land up with blackened tips or damaged areas, and that's just easy to sort out. Nice, clean, sanitized equipment. And all we're going to be doing is going along the top of the leaf and cutting off those blackened bits. If there's any old flower spikes, at this point, they will be from last year, so you'll just go in and cut them off easily. But please, please, don't do as I do, do as I say. Don't do this while your plant is in full bloom, because invariably you're going to come across problems, you're going to damage your flowers, perhaps cut the wrong stem and cut a flower bud off, or like I did here while playing with this plant, I've gone and knocked the flower bud off. Instead of getting all those beautiful blooms, I've now got, I do have several other buds that are being produced on this plant, so always remember also with your Dendrobiums, when they're starting to bud like this, check for slugs and snails. They produce a lot of perfume that helps with the pollinators, but along with that, it's going to attract those slugs and snails. Even at these small little points like this, the subtle scents or the honeydew drops that these plants produce attract those slugs and snails, and they'll get, here we can see the leaves being munched away happily, and we know some of those little budlets, as they've started to open, have been eaten too. Those are the juiciest, tastiest parts for those slugs and snails, and they take them out first before they actually even move on to the leaves. So always be aware when your plant is starting to bud. As soon as you notice it, treat it. Remove it from its position so it can't be attacked by those slugs and snails, and you don't have the same problem. And again, don't work with your plant when it's got these buds on. Those budlets are heavy and they're attached at such a small point. Any knock on them is going to break them off like this, and you're not going to get the flowers you were hoping for. So do this pre-flowering or post-flowering, because then it will be ready for the following year. So the only canes you're going to be taking out of these Dendrobiums are these dry, dead canes. Those are the only ones with those nice sanitized equipment. You're going to be going in right at the base and cutting them out. We want to be leaving as little stump as possible so that nothing can then rot and cause infection into the plant. We just want to have those all removed and clean it up. This is going to help with the air movement in and around the plant to help keep it happy and healthy. All of these old pseudobulbs are storing energy that's going to help with the flowering and help with the new growth. So we're not going to disturb any of those, and we're going to leave them be. And again, with these eaten out leaves, we're going to actually only remove the parts that have yellowed and leave the rest of them on the plant. Yes, it's going to be unsightly for the moment, but this is where the plant is photosynthesizing from, and we've already got reduced photosynthesis happening from a smaller area, so we don't want to reduce that any further. We want to leave those leaves on so that this plant can keep growing. So let's look at some of the others. There we go, the Dendrobium speciosum. Also, they have these huge, big, large pseudobulbs that hold large amounts of food for it during those dormant periods. And here again, we see all these old pseudobulbs that just need to be cut. If they're old enough, they can just be pulled out. But as soon as you feel there's any hold still to it, get in there and cut right down at the base. These are going to be fairly tough to cut because they are quite fibrous. But you just got to get in there with your sharp secateurs and slowly cut it out. Also, you'll notice with this speciosum, I've only got a single flower head on it because we've got all these kikis. So this just got some extra water at the wrong period, just a bit too early in winter, and we landed up with kikis as opposed to flower spikes. So that's also another important part about making sure your orchid is in that beautiful state that you want, is to make sure you're looking after it properly. You're giving it what it needs when it needs it, not giving it too much water at a point when it really doesn't want it, and then you land up with only one flower spike as opposed to many. So here we have 5 little kikis and 1 flower spike, so we would have had a nice 6 flower spike plant here. And here we can see it's starting to outgrow its pots again. We've got new, fresh, big growth popping out there and over here. So this plant, we had removed half of it already and probably given it away. So this plant is going to have to be repotted into a bigger pot. Dendrobiums do like to be quite confined in the pots that they grow in. They tend to flower better. Here we can see how big this plant is for the size pot. And here we have a broken pot. This pot is extremely heavy because at least half of it is made up of broken bricks. And we'll show you when we do the repotting of this. We're not going to be repotting it now. We're waiting and hoping for some good flowering out of this plant. But especially when your pot is broken like this and your plant is so big and heavy, it's time to repot. We want to make sure those roots can then breathe again, but we're not going to be disturbing it too much. We'll probably be removing it straight from this pot and putting it into a slightly bigger pot with some more air in and around the root ball as it is. But when we open it, we'll have to look deeper into it. And here, with these Dendrobium phalaenopsis or biggie bums, when they've got these big long flower spikes, we go in and we cut them away as close to the stem as possible, just to give a much neater look to the plant. It also gives less room for insects to hide. That makes it look neater. It gives less dying material on the plant that could possibly bring infection. But just always be careful, especially when going in close where there are leaves. The leaves are brittle. They don't bend easily. These hard cane dendrobiums have those tougher, thicker leaves that really don't like to bend. So don't force your secateurs too deep in there if you can't reach. You can always remove that extra little bit later when the older leaves start to fall off and you have bare canes. There we go, a much neater looking plant already, and ready for the new growth and the new flowering. And here with this Dendrobium Hamana Lake, this one we had specifically overwatered during winter so that I could get these extra kikis. If I'm wanting to remove kikis that are this small like this, then what I'm going to be doing is removing the pseudobulb right from the base down here. And then that will give these little kikis enough energy still to keep growing while they still have such small roots. If I'm removing larger kikis such as this with good root volume, then I can just carefully remove the kiki itself and transplant that as I need it. You can also just remove that section of pseudobulb by doing a cross cut through the pseudobulb just underneath the node where the kiki is attached, and use that to just give that little bit of extra energy for the plant. I'm going to be leaving these on for another month or two before I remove them. But then as I remove them, I'm going to be taking out a fair number of these canes with the kikis attached. And that's just going to give me a neater, more upright plant. And that's really what I want from a habiki in a pot for indoors. To have it with these long arcing canes just is a bit messy for indoors, but when I go put them outdoors on the trees, they're perfectly fine like that. So, and here again, the only pseudocanes that we ever remove are these old, dry, dead ones. So it's just a little bit of careful maintenance, removing those old dead leaves and taking out those dead pseudobulbs. And with your Dendrobium noble types, especially once they've run out of their pots like this and you want to transplant them, your best bet is to do is to again just cut off these old dead canes, get a hanging basket preferably that is going to be suitable to the size, and then just lay your plant around the outside of the basket. And with the roots touching the lining, whether you're using coir or some other fabric such as that, that's going to allow for the water and the air to get into the media and allow the roots also to get through that lining and into the media. That will probably make this plant the happiest. Also, at the shape it is, if you wanted to, you could probably wrap this around quite easily onto the trunk of a tree, which is invariably where Dendrobium nobles do best, is outdoors with all that air movement, the bright light, and all that the outdoors has to offer it. That's where they are the happiest. So dendrobiums are some of the most beautiful orchids when in flower, but can be relatively unsightly, if you want to put it that way, when they don't have any flowers. Also, one of the reasons why they do better outdoors. If you are just looking to try and neaten them up and keep them in a shape, there's just those few things that you can do to actually try and get them to look their best if you're keeping and growing them indoors. Remember, your culture on dendrobiums is what is going to ensure. And remember, the cultural practices you employ is what ensures you get the maximum out of your dendrobium. Check up on each dendrobium that you have to find out what its ideal conditions are and try and match them as closely as possible. Remember, a lot of them like that winter rest period. That's the reasons that they have these large canes or pseudobulbs to store all that energy. So make sure you know your plant and what it requires so that you can get it to grow. That you then need the maintenance. Because if you can't get it to grow, you're not going to need to maintain. And dendrobiums are some of the easiest to maintain. Not terribly much work needs to go into it, and all the joy and beauty that you'll get out of it. So happy growing, happy maintaining, and happy plants. Thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below, and hit that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.